Welcome to Seniority Authority, the podcast where I track down experts to answer your questions on aging. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. Let's get smarter about growing older. As we grow older, there are so many things to celebrate. Our wisdom, the gift of another day and another year, the ability to finally understand who we are. But there are challenges to aging, and one of the first is how our body starts announcing its presence in new, unforgiving ways. Stiff joints, low back pain, all-around aches that we didn't experience in our 20s. Am I right? So what's the solution? Chalk it up to just getting older? Absolutely not, says Will Thomas, certified yoga instructor, studio owner, and volunteer stretching leader for first responders, the Wounded Warrior Project, and more. Will has taught more than 37,000 people in over 2,000 classes how to stretch your way to a happier, stronger body. Thanks to our show sponsor, the Riverwoods Group, Northern New England's largest family of not-for-profit continuing care retirement communities, where independent, active adults find purpose, community, and peace of mind. Visit us at riverwoodsgroup.org. Now, let's hear from today's guest. Thank you so much for joining us on Seniority Authority, Will.
Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
This is just a great topic that I know a lot of our listeners are really interested in, is fitness, stretching, and body aches and pains. And you yourself came into the yoga experience taking your first yoga class in grad school. What motivated you to first step on the mat?
Yeah, I had used running as my exercise, I guess, through my 20s. And already by age 29, I started feeling it in my knees. They started bothering me. So I looked around for other things to do. And just at the right moment, this college fraternity buddy of mine said, "Hey, I just tried this yoga class and you got to try it." Coming from him, it was a little out of left field, so it was enough to get me to try it, and I did, and I loved it.
Well, I definitely don't connect fraternities with yoga, but it sounds like
Correct.
whatever way you get to be introduced to yoga is a good thing.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
And yoga has exploded in this country, right? We've got hot yoga, we've got Bikram yoga, we've got power yoga, but you talk about stretching and strengthening. Can you tell us why physiologically this is important as we age?
Well, specifically, strengthening and muscles are important as we age because muscles, their job is to protect our joints and to keep us moving and doing what we want to do in life in a way that has the joints working well. You know, the muscles are around the joints and it's their job to keep everything in place and everything aligned and everything moving properly. Yet, according to Harvard Medical School, when we reach age 30, at least this study I think was about men specifically, but according to them, we lose 3 to 5% of our muscle mass every decade, starting at age 30. So if we don't do anything, we're already at a deficit. So we need to keep up our muscle work, especially late in life, even though kind of culturally we think about weightlifting muscles as maybe more of a youthful thing. It's actually more important for us as we age.
Okay, and that makes sense. And I do know that through research at Tufts University and other places that you can also replace and increase your bone density with strength training as you age. So you don't have to assume that your muscles are going to atrophy and that your bone density is going to dwindle away. You can do things to help increase them.
For sure,
But
for sure.
I'm thinking a lot of my listeners who are older would be a little wary of stretching and yoga. Is there a time when it's too late, Will, to start?
No, again, to go back to Harvard, I found this quote that I like from Dr. Thomas Storer, director of the Exercise Physiology and Physical Function Lab at Harvard-affiliated Brigham and Women's Hospital. He says, quote, "It takes work, dedication, and a plan, but it is never too late to rebuild muscle and
Great.
maintain it." Now, that's a hopeful statement if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think it gives people who are listening an opportunity to say, this is something, and especially if you talk about, and you do this a lot, Will, you talk about stretching. So I think that could be a way to ease people into the idea of what you're doing is stretching, and it's kind of like saying hello to our bodies, is just kind of saying, okay, I'm here. You and I are gonna work together all day, body. So let's stretch and kind of waken up our muscles.
Yeah, it's interesting how the two things go together, strength and stretching. And we can use strength to help find stretching and flexibility in the body. And we can also use stretching and flexibility to find strength in the body. When we think about strengthening, we think about, lifting weights and the classic gym scenario. And when I think about going into a gym and looking at a bunch of weights or a bunch of machines, I can quickly get lost because there's so many choices. What do I do? How do I start getting stronger? How do I know where my body needs to get stronger? Maybe there are weights that I have around the house, or maybe there are routines that I remember from being in school or something that will strengthen some muscles. But again, how do I know that they're the right muscles? And what I found is that in order to strengthen the right places, if I use stretches in the body as guides, then my own body can tell me exactly what muscles I need to strengthen. So the two things go together.
If you're getting smarter, let us know. Leave us a review, a rating, wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell your friends and follow us on social. We're at Seniority Authority on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And don't forget, if you're listening to YouTube, hit the notification bell so you can subscribe. Or subscribe to our newsletter at seniorityauthority.org so you don't miss a thing. I do completely understand what you're saying. I think it is very intimidating to walk into a gym weight room these days and look at all of the equipment and all of the people and all of the various activities, and your mind kind of says, okay, what do I do now? Where do I start? And how do I make sure I don't hurt myself? So let's start there. Can you tell us how you would recommend someone start a stretching practice? Where should they begin? For how long? What kind of equipment do they need?
Okay, sure. I have some instructional videos that I put on YouTube, and I'll make sure that you get the link so you can share that. And I would say you start at home, turn on one of these videos, and start going through these poses and start to train yourself to listen to what your muscles say. It's kind of a strange concept maybe at the beginning, but we use these poses to move through the body and find out where we're tight. It's a pretty simple concept, but it's not something that we're used to doing, especially when it comes to exercise. When it comes to exercise, we're normally used to just do it. We're used to,
Push through it, no pain, no gain, that whole philosophy.
right. We're used to, well, I want to do this exercise. I want to lift this many pounds. I want to hold a yoga pose for this long. I want to look like this in a yoga pose. And I'm just going to make the body do it. And if the body protests in any way, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to ignore any signals because I've decided that I want to do this exercise. Okay. That's sort of the way that we're programmed to approach exercise. So, for your listeners to start with a stretching practice, I would say let's recognize that. And let's recognize that if we deprogram ourselves or unlearn that just do it mentality, we can start very simply at home, moving through the body, listening to what's happening in this little muscle and that little joint in this little place, and start to make a connection between the brain and the muscles that are going to make us feel better.
I think that's really smart. What you're recommending is basically stretching and using our body weight first before we end up piling on 10 pounds, 20 pounds, and lifting dumbbells, is first get in tune to our body, because we're not in this Western culture here. We're not programmed that way. We're not programmed to listen to our body and to
Right.
understand, some days are good days. And
Well, I'd like to get people started thinking about their own breathing.
I love
Yeah.
where this is going, and thank you for sharing that video. I'll link to it in the show notes so everyone who is listening can download it
Right.
and give it a try. But if you are somebody who's like wants to start right away, what are the 5 stretches you'd recommend that people do?
Okay. So, for somebody who's listening right now, if they want to start experimenting with what I'm talking about in terms of stretching and listening to the body, using stretching to find strength and using strength to find stretching, then let's stand up, or you don't even actually have to stand up if you don't want to. But if you do, stand up and then bring your hands under your chin, knuckles touching your chin. And then breathe in by your nose as you bring your elbows up and get to where you can feel your rib cage. So make your wrists straight like this and really use your elbows to help you find where you're tight in your ribs. Okay. Now, we're going to work some legs muscles here. Keep that feeling in your ribs going and just contract your right leg muscles. Squeeze them all the way and then release them all the way. Now, the other leg, squeeze all the way and release all the way. So, not moving at all, just contracting and releasing and feeling what it feels like when you do that. Now, do both legs. Just squeeze them and release. Okay, so that's the legs. Now we're going to forget the legs. We're going to go to the abdominals. Pull the abdominals, like pull your stomach all the way up and then release. Pull it back, release, pull it up. Now hold your stomach in. Okay, let's take a
Are we
second
holding
here.
our breath while we're squeezing our abdominals? Because I'm doing this
I was
with
going to
you.
say let's take a second here and just breathe, just a normal breath. So while we're actually doing the contractions, it doesn't so much matter that we're breathing like during the contraction itself because it's pretty quick. But what is important is that we don't hold the breath for more than a few seconds as we're trying to get something done. So we've taken a little breath here to calm ourselves. Now, pull the stomach in again and hold it in. With your stomach in, take the biggest breath that you can take. Now, as you exhale, just contract your right arm and release. Left arm. And just feel what you feel when you do those contractions. Squeeze both arms. Isn't that cool? Okay. Now, yeah, head up, elbows forward, and maybe elbows touch, maybe not. But use your knuckles to push into your chin until you feel it in your throat. Now, can you use your elbows to find a spot right between your shoulder blades that's a little bit tight. So find that spot. Good. Now go back to the legs, contract your left leg, and then release it. Right leg. And just feel what muscles are responding. Maybe none are responding yet. That's all right. Just send the signal from your brain. Squeeze both legs and release. Now forget the legs and work on the abdominals. Pull them up and let them go. Now pull your abdominals back to your spine. What does that feel like in your back? Release your abdominals. Pull them up again. Hold your abdominals in with a stomach in, inhale breath. As you exhale, squeeze your right arm, grip harder with your fingers, and then release. Now the left arm. Now both arms, contract them all the way. Can you hit that spot still between your shoulder blades? Release your arms muscles all the way. And then that's enough. Arms down to the side. So it's just like a little tour. Yeah, yeah. And I don't know, I didn't time it, but it wasn't that long. It's a little tour that we can make through the body just to listen, just to read, just to check in with what's happening. And when we do that, I think that we're filling the brain with information about the
And
muscles.
oxygen. And
oxygen.
oxygen. And I've never done, and I've done yoga, lots of yoga, and I've never done that pose where you put your knuckles by your chin, and that was really interesting. And I was sitting here because I've got equipment around me, and it was very effective sitting down too.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It for
my
sure is.
back is feeling much better, much more awake.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because we're so used to moving through life not listening to what's happening in the body that if we just take a little bit of time to listen, to read, to accept what's happening in the muscles, it has an overall both calming and invigorating effect. Like, oh yeah, I got those muscles. They're responding now. They're going to do what I need them to do. It gives us a confidence moving forward in our day.
That was terrific. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is the you can tell why we chose Will Thomas to do our first video and audio podcast, because I did the exercises with Will, and if you're looking on YouTube, you can do them too. Really invigorating, and like that was 5 minutes. So
Yeah, yeah. And no equipment and no special knowledge because you mentioned yoga. The way that is popularly taught now, including by myself for a long time until I came to this method, it is a sport. We have external measurements in popular yoga. We want to do this pose, we want to reach a certain depth of this pose, and that's what we focus on, which is great because that can be very motivating. But it can also involve either not reading or altogether ignoring signals from the body in
yeah,
service.
and pushing yourself
Right.
mentally to overcome the physical, like get lower in the pose, get tighter, hold it longer, and that's the becomes a focus, not listening to what your body's telling you.
Exactly. It is deciding with the brain that we want to make a certain pose and we're going to get to the pose because that's what we're going to measure. And if it doesn't feel great, or if I can move a certain way to get the externally measured result and avoid places in the body, then that's where our brain goes. And again, yoga is wonderful and helps uh, the world, I think. But if you're concerned about areas in your body that aren't working well, and you've got a tight shoulder, or you've got tight hips, or you're not breathing like you think that you could be able to breathe, then it's time to internally measure. Then it's time to go in and feel little places in the body and check in with them and get them working better. So we have to put away the external measures for a little while and work on the internal measurements.
And I think that answers one of my key questions, which is what are the things that people, what are the common mistakes? So if my listeners want to start doing this, and they start this practice, what are the common mistakes? It seems like one of the what you're saying is one of the common mistakes is you got to get out of your own head and get
Yeah.
into your body.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the number one mistake with a stretching practice, again, if you're trying to learn to stretch to make things in your body work better, the number one mistake is treating it like a sport, as something that is supposed to be tiring, that is supposed to be challenging, that you're supposed to be huffing and puffing afterwards. That goes back to when we should breathe during this. We should breathe all the time during this. We don't want to hold the breath to gear up to make something happen in the body. We want to stay nice and calm and keep the brain open to feeling these little things in the body. Number one mistake is treating it as something that's going to be externally measured. Then the number two mistake, closely related to number one, is holding the breath. Um, and
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 that's almost instinctive. I mean, intellectually, I know the breathing is important, but when I start focusing on something, I hold my breath and it's really hard to breathe right.
yes, yeah, and that's why we call it, well, because the brain will allocate the energy through the body based on what we need. And if the brain thinks that we need to be alert and we're trying to focus on something, then it's going to direct our energy one way, and maybe the breathing has to wait. As if we decide, no, hang on, I'm going to slow down here and I'm going to breathe through this. And if I don't get the result as quickly, that's okay with me because I'm going to breathe normally while I'm doing it. Goes back to, what are you measuring? Are you measuring something externally, or are you measuring how every little thing feels?
Okay, that makes sense. So the key is the breath should be a focal and integral part of this, not an afterthought.
Correct. And with the breathing, overall, I think everyone would agree that we probably need to breathe more and breathe more deeply. I think where we run into difficulty is that breathing is, it's automatic, it's unconscious, it's voluntary. So if we try to make it a conscious activity and decide, well, I'm going to breathe better today, it doesn't last very long. I can say, okay, I'm going to breathe better, and I can sit here and I can take a few nice breaths, and pretty soon I'm going to forget that, because breathing is designed to be in the background, right? Take a look at why we don't breathe deeply. We could try that right now. Let's do it just sitting. Pull your stomach in and take the biggest breath that you can. Now, what stops you? Go ahead, exhale. What stopped you from breathing in more? Let's try it again. Now, Now that you know what you're looking for, let's try it again. Pull your stomach in, take a huge inhale. And at what point do you think your brain says, okay, no more inhale, go ahead, exhale?
I don't know what gets in the way, but
Let's
I
try.
do know that we breathe more from our neck and less from our belly or the chest. And I think the chest is more shallow breathing.
Well, let's direct that with the stomach in. So this is not belly breathing here. This is holding the belly still and taking another big inhale breath. What tells you to not breathe in anymore? What doesn't want to move anymore? And then exhale. Well, stomach the stomach out of it because we're purposely holding it in. And one more. Takes a little bit, but pull the stomach in, hold it tight, huge inhale. What in your body says, okay, that's enough, no more inhale, I'm ready for an exhale? Yeah, take a little bit to there because it's supposed to be automatic. It's supposed to be unconscious, right? But if we analyze, okay, well, why don't I breathe more? I want to breathe more deeply. Why don't I breathe more deeply? It's because at a certain point, the muscles in the ribs and the chest are going to say, hey, this is a little bit uncomfortable. Please go to an exhale. And the brain goes, yeah. And maybe even the next time, the brain's going to direct those muscles to not even go that far again. So over the time,
Okay, I see this all connecting now.
yeah,
The strengthening of the muscles means you have more capacity to breathe deeper and take in more oxygen, which subsequently helps your heart, your head, and your lungs.
exactly. Without even having to think about it. Because again, if we decide, oh, I'm going to breathe better today, we're going to forget about that in 15 seconds. But if we condition the muscles to stop a little later in the breathing process because they know that they're a little more flexible, the brain understands that they can get this big instead of only this big, then without even having to think about it, we're going to breathe more deeply, more calmly all day long and all night long, too.
That is great. I did not, it took me a while to get there, but it
Yeah.
makes sense and it all ties back together.
Yeah. And it does take a while because again, we're programmed to move through, get what we want done, and not consider the effects on how we feel. And that's a good system because if we were always so in tune with how every little thing feels, we wouldn't get anything done in life, right? We that whole compartmentalization. But
Yeah, it helps us in the world, but at some point you have to say, okay, how do I restore and strengthen this body that I'm going through life in? And
yeah,
that I think you've made it clear requires a different kind of focus.
yeah. The news is it doesn't take that long to get the information from the muscles up into the brain. No equipment. It just requires the willingness to spend a little time in, I call it just listen to it mode, as opposed to just do it mode.
I love that. And this has been so helpful. I've learned a
Great.
lot. I've gotten practices that I can do now. And thank you for all your time and for
Absolutely.
helping
Thank you.
kind of walk through something right here in the midst of our podcast.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
And thank you also for sending the link. So, for those of you who want to work more directly, we'll have a link to an introductory video that Will has of his 7 minutes. And if you want to learn more, you can find him at yogahousemiami.com. And we'll
Mm-hmm.
have a link to that in our show notes also. But before we leave, and I know you've got dogs and kids waiting for you. I have a little fast five lightning round.
Okay.
We know you're flexible and healthy, but now we want to get to know you a little bit better. So
Okay.
can you share with us your favorite guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure. I probably have a few, but one of them is turn on the news and political news. And I know that it's not good for me, but it's guilty pleasure.
All right. That's right. And your favorite of many, what is your favorite healthy practice?
Big realization that I had is it 5 years ago now was that I could eat a lot less and still feel full and satisfied. And basically, it's conscious eating, I would call it. And it came from this practice of eating and getting really in tune with the body and noticing how everything feels, not only how exercise feels or how movement feels, but how what I eat feels, how it was able to a lot about full and satisfied all the time, but eating a lot less and feeling a lot better as a result.
That sounds great. And I know a lot of people are starting to be more conscious about what they eat and how what they put in their mouth affects how they feel.
Yeah.
What is guaranteed to make you laugh?
My friends from high school.
Great. And last book you loved?
Last book that I loved was Arthur C. Brooks. He wrote a book called From Strength to Strength.
Yes, I have been very fortunate to have interviewed him on this podcast prior to his book and also after, and he's phenomenal. He's one of my favorite reads.
What he writes about so well is get older. There are some things that are going to go wrong, but there are some things that are going to get better. And stretching practice, physical way of experiencing that for me, where I'm going to get smarter about my body the more into the stretching practice that I get, and the more I learn about myself. So that's a very hopeful and positive outlook. Um, Instead of gloom and doom as I get older, it's get better and better. And he writes about that super well. So that was my favorite
He
book.
really does. He's got a great podcast, and his book is called From Strength to Strength. And we'll put that in the show notes too. But I
Mhm.
believe in that philosophy that you do this stretching to appreciate where you are and what you can still do, not mourn who you are no longer. You're no longer 20.
For sure.
And a lot of us don't want to be 20 again,
Yeah.
but appreciate your body and where you are.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. For sure. He part of it, he talks about how one of the things that we get better at doing as we age is teaching. Is, uh, to college students, enroll in the classes with the oldest professors to get the best instruction. And 50 something year old yoga teacher, that makes me happy.
Lastly, what's your favorite escape will? I mean, you live in Miami, so that's a pretty awesome place.
Yes,
Except when people are flooding there for a spring break, which they are now. But
they
what's your
are.
favorite escape?
They are. I can really need to. I can sit down and try to learn a new song on the guitar and go into just a completely different world and shut everything else out. So that's a tool that I've found about myself, that when I need to shut the brain off, I can go and try to learn something new.
And that's another really, really good activity for all of us who
Mm,
are getting older, as we all are, is learning something new. Really fires up those areas of your brain that
yep.
need it. And especially something creative like guitar playing or another language is terrific.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here. It's been really, really wonderful for me, and I know for our listeners.
And for me too. Thank you.
That's our show for today. If it helped you think differently, will you help me? Go to Seniority Authority page in your podcasting app and hit either the plus, the heart, or the favorite or subscribe buttons so you don't miss out. And tell your friends so we can help more people get smarter about growing older. That's our show for today. If you liked it, please tell your friends so we can reach more minds and keep the conversation going. Or follow us on social at Seniority Authority. I'm Kathleen Toomey. Until next time, enjoy your chance to get smarter about growing older.